Dark Star was their vehicle for getting all the way out there and coming all the way back. And it's kind of a slight thing. It's just a couple of lines of code, you know, from which all this magic came. You know, there were versions of it in the early 70s that lasted like 40 minutes.
Unlike all the other songs, Dark Star had a fluidity and ease to it. You didn't so much begin it and end it as enter it. Like it was going on all the time, and you just tuned it in to see what was going on now. It is that sense of a continuity, of a continuum that you just plug into. And not only that, once you've plugged into it, it's a wonderfully easy piece to fly. It takes you places with a fairly small amount of effort, as opposed to a lot of pieces that they might have a lot of chords or rhythmic changes or cues or things that you have to be on your toes about. It might not be that great a song, but it takes a lot of your attention to make it work, whereas Dark Star will work like gangbusters with only a little bit of attending.
With Dark Star and some other new pieces in their repertoire, the band turned their minds towards recording an album. Given the nature of the artistic space in which they were now working, Garcia and Lesh approached Tom Constanten, who had remained in the realm of modern classical, about joining the Dead.
I had been in touch with Phil and Jerry pretty much all the time since when I first met them until when I went off to Europe to study with Berlioz, Stockhausen, Boulez et al. As far as they were concerned, they still wanted what I had to contribute. Part of my attraction vis-a-vis playing with the band was my avant-garde connection, is that I brought that edginess, that round the corner, for want of a better word, looniness, opening the full moon window and let's see what comes in. And all sorts of interesting things came in, and miraculously, somehow we seem to be largely able to deal with them.
Fine piano player, which they hadn't had before. You know, Pigpan tooled a little on his farfisa, but could not be described as a real, you know, professional keyboard player. So they had a harmonic foundation that they had lacked before. And TC was important.
As a live act, the band's supremacy remained unchallenged, and a free show on Haight Street in early '68 packed the road as far as the eye could see. Though they were yet to translate the alchemy of their stage performances onto record, developments during the spring suggested a template for how it might be done. The Grateful Dead had become part of a consortium of San Francisco bands that had taken over the Carousel Ballroom, and with their own venue at hand, the group had a forum in which to work on developing and showcasing their new sound. They built up a legendary crew of technicians and engineers, including Bob Matthews, Betty Cantor, Dan Healy, and a returned Owsley Stanley. The collection formed a tireless and inventive sonic support, negating the requirement for technical personnel or record company producers that were outside the Dead family. The artist-owned ballroom, however, was a short-lived enterprise. Against the backdrop of social political convulsions and confrontations between police and the counterculture, the Carousel rapidly ran out of money and closed.
We wanted kind of a community place that belonged to essentially all the bands and not subject to Bill Graham's whims or Chet Helms' whims, but this, and not even to be a competition really, but just to be a community center where young bands could play. And unfortunately, right around that time, Martin Luther King got killed, and the city erupted in violence. Cities all over the country erupted in violence and riots and so on and so forth. National Guard got called out, and then the dance halls went into a slump because the Fillmore was in the black part of town, and the Avalon was downtown, and we were right downtown, and they were hot spots, and nobody wanted to go out. So we had like 13 losing weekends. All the ballrooms lost money, but we were the least able to afford it. Janice got, she got really mad. We had this big meeting at the end about whether we should keep it open or not, and so on and so forth. And Janice said, you guys, she called us every name in the book and said, you guys are just silly. Come on. We're musicians. We're not business people. Leave that to Bill Graham and leave that to Chet Helms. But please, let's not get involved in business, So we ended up giving it over to Bill Graham, and Bill Graham turned it into the Fillmore West.
With their sound crew in tow, the Grateful Dead set about the recording of their second album, Anthem of the Sun, with a reckless abandon of all established norms. They used the studio to experiment and innovate with the recording process, driving away Warner's producer Dave Hassinger and turning the console over to Dan Healy.
Anthem of the Sun started out as an attempt to simulate on vinyl what the live concert experiences was like. The first Grateful Dead album was deemed a dismal failure in that regard.
One of the things that we built into our contract, which was unheard of at the time, was unlimited studio time. We knew we had to pay for it, but we wanted as much as we wanted, And our strategy was, what we want to do is we want to play in the studio. We want to learn how the studio works. We don't want somebody else doing it. It's our music. We want to do it.
It was too much for our producer. That was our second album, right? So this is when the producer that was assigned to us by Warner Brothers just...
I took a gyroscope, one of those kids' toys, yanked the string, got it spinning really good and hard, and then just put it against the soundboard of the grand piano with the pedal down. The sound is not unlike that of a chainsaw being taken to the piano. Now, the producer, Dave Hassinger, Bob Weir said that he cleared his seat by 3 feet. He was up in the air, and it was the beginning of the end. I think when Bob Weir asked for the sound of thick air, that was the last straw. But we had to prepare him for that, and with the piano, we did.
Eventually driving Hassinger away, they start over, doing it themselves. Then they decide that it's not a studio album, it's going to be a mixed studio and live album. And they start syncing live versions with studio versions.
There were places where there were 2 live recordings of the same music going on at the same time. You can hear Jerry's guitar solo split up, because on different nights he chose to do different things. It amplified the sound of the music when it was together. It made it more solid. It gave it an additional conceptual stereophony, because it wasn't only just left-right stereophony, but you had this overlay of different images from different performances of the same music. There were pre-echoes. In other words, we would run the tape backwards into an echo chamber and record that, and then play it again forwards. And so before you heard bing, you'd have bing, rather like. It was rife for experimentation.
They had a couple different recordings of live performances of Alligator and Caution. And they had one thing, I think, where one playback is being slowed down gradually with a VSO and another is being speeded up gradually with a VSO. So you have these overlapping time distortions. These were techniques that had come from TC and Phil's side of the world. And the cool thing about the Dead was that it was based on Pigpen's raunchy, blues rock stuff. So, it was like, it was great American musical forms being brought together in a whole new way. So it was like 20th century classical music meets R&B, the lyrics of Alligator and the concepts of Terry Riley, and Steve Reich meeting in the recording studio with these acid heads. Pretty fucking cool, if you ask me.
Despite its high ambition, Anthem of the Sun made little impact beyond the Dead's already dedicated fan base. The band were not entirely satisfied with the final result, and the album barely made the top 100. Though music critics were receptive to the ingenuity, Anthem was widely held to be too challenging for a mainstream rock audience.
Anthem of the Sun, see, is the best representation of the noodly, arty part of the band, by far. Anthem of the Sun it's a record I've never stopped playing. I liked it when it came out, which many people didn't, and I've never stopped liking it. There are moments there that it seems to me realize the less Constanten side of the band, that give it form. And what a record has to do is it has to, you don't have the pheromones floating around, you don't have the visual, you don't have the insistence that you concentrate because there's really nothing else to do there except twiddle your toes. So you got to listen to the music or fall asleep. None of that happens on a record. The record has to reach out and grab you more, and it does.
San Francisco bands, I mean, there were moments of outreach. You know, a record like the Jefferson Airplane Surrealistic Pillow, for example, you know, invited people in. You know, you could get what the Airplane was about in large part from that album, even though if you went to see them, there was plenty more going on. You know, the Grateful Dead never really managed to get there with that record. That really was just, you know, this is the one. If, you know, even if you don't know who the Grateful Dead is, here's the album. Oh, okay, I get it. You know, there was still a sense with Anthem of the Sun in particular, you know, Oxa Moxa also, you know, I mean, all of those, that you kind of had to be on the inside.
It's too intellectual. It just went into places. It's not made for entertainment. If you listen to as experimental a group in its way as the Beatles, but they were always virtually entertaining. This is not entertaining. I mean, in spots, it's fascinating. There's material there that they would play for the next 30 years very successfully. But it requires a surrender that is not what you expect of entertainment.
Anthem of the Sun had thrown the two identities of the band into sharp relief. On the one hand, there was the progressive jazz fusion led by Lesh and TC. On the other, the thumping R&B represented by Pigpen. The implications of this schizophrenia announced themselves at a band meeting in late '68, where Garcia and Lesh suggested that there was no longer a place in the group for Pigpen and Bob Weir. Utilizing cutting-edge technology installed at the Avalon by the Dead sound crew, it became the first ever live 16-track recording and was titled simply Live Dead.
We were in the lurch to Warner Brothers. They had thrown in close to $100,000 in producing Oxa Moxa, and they had not yet seen a product, and they were getting understandably antsy. So somewhere the idea came up is, how about we offer you a double album, live performance, plus that? 3 for the price of $100,000 suddenly didn't seem to be that horrendous a deal. So we wound up recording all of our concerts, 16-track. And then afterwards, we'd get together and listen to them. And it was exasperating. For several weeks, everything we listened to, there would be something that was wrong. Even with the sound good, one of the players would say, well, no, don't put that out there. I didn't do well that night, or things didn't come together, or this went wrong in this piece or the other.
Well, I get a little lonely in the middle of the night, and I need you, darling, to make things all right. So come on, baby, baby, please, and I'm begging you, baby, because I'm on my knees.
Live Dead's a perfect album. Live Dead is the perfect Grateful Dead album, for my money. In terms of all of the albums, this is what the Grateful Dead were at that time.
The 16-track technology showcased on Live Dead provoked the band to another experimentation frenzy. Though they had already begun to record Oxa Moxa, they started over with the new kit, spending months exploring its possibilities and running up an enormous studio bill in the process.
You get 13 or 14 tracks recorded, and then Mickey will say, hey, can I put this cowbell on track 14? And you wound up getting all these things going on, which made the mixdown sessions extremely chaotic. Especially because the technology was so new. Of course, we didn't know what we were doing, but nobody knew what they were doing. They were ramifications of the technology that really had not shown up yet, because nobody had taken that horse and rode it as hard as we did.